I'm Daniel James, and you're listening to 7am. This week, Pauline Hanson declared there are no good Muslims.
You know, you say, oh, well, there's good Muslims out there. Well, I'm sorry. How can you tell me there are good Muslims?
And renewed her call for a ban on people from Gaza and other so-called terror hotspots. After a backlash from across the community, she has since walked back her comments on Muslim Australians. But her track record for stoking racial division remains intact. It's language that was once politically toxic. Now, it's cutting through with a whole generation of voters that feel they've been dudded by the promise of prosperity through hard work alone. Today, Director of Strategy and Analytics at RedBridge Group, Kos Samaras, on the voters once known as Howard's battlers, why more of them are turning to One Nation, and the forces reshaping Australia's political centre and the social fabric of democracy. It's Saturday, February 21. Kos, thank you so much for joining us. You wrote this week about how Howard's battlers are turning to One Nation. Can you paint a picture for us as to who they are and why they're attracted to what Pauline Hanson is selling?
They're largely in the regions, in the outer suburbs of our large cities, largely in their 40s, 50s and 60s, work with their hands or work by standing on their feet, so to speak. If we're talking about Gen X, these are people who, had their lives significantly disrupted during the recession of the 90s and entered the housing market at about the same time older millennials did. So, at the beginning of the housing boom. So overall, the majority that I'm talking about here have got significant mortgages, lots of mortgage stress, declining capacity to earn money because of their age. And of course, these Gen Xers that we're talking about, they may have kids in their late teens or adult kids. They've got parents now who are very much in their late 70s and 80s. And above all else, proportionally higher number of parents who are on the pension and are not wealthy. So they've got parents who are in great need and they've got children who are in great need.
So what can they see in the fringes that they can't see in mainstream politics at the moment?
Yeah, this group, in their 30s and 40s were voting for John Howard. They thought that if I worked hard, this political party promises me a narrative that hard work rewards aspiration. They were Howard's battlers. They were very patient throughout the Abbott, Morrison, Turnbull era. Again, they were patient leading up to the federal election with Dutton. And I think the election loss and coupled with a realisation of the scale of Labor's win was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Under the Albanese government, we've lost in housing, immigration, cost of living, this climate change BS, the cost of the economy. You've got so many more public servants that are being put on, it's draining the economy.
So the scale of the win meant that they couldn't see themselves anywhere in mainstream politics, and so they've turned to One Nation. I mean, does One Nation actually solve any of their problems for these voters, though?
No, they don't. But that's not why they're voting for One Nation. And they don't care if One Nation has some dodgy candidates or policies that don't stand up to scrutiny. This is about burning the place down. This is about throwing the chessboard over and sending a very clear signal to the established political parties that they're done with tolerating this version of democracy. And we see this writ large in the UK and other Western countries where these types of voters have given up on the system. If you're used to this diet of the duopoly and you're very comfortable in that system and you play the game as everyone else has for decades, you're about to get a bit of a shock because what worked even 5 years ago just won't work now. And I've made this point with regards to their leadership change. That's a 1996 tool being applied to a new political era. It just won't work. And we know that what happened in Canberra with the leadership change has really no bearing on what's going on with this realignment in centre-right politics.
So if the coalition is bleeding votes to the right, what about Labor? If this is a protest vote, why aren't they losing voters as well?
Yeah, here we get into the tribal nature of the Australian public now. And so when we psychologically test voters now. And we do that through a number of ways. The main tool we use is a battery test, where we'll ask you 10 questions and you won't know that the answers will give us a very strong indication as to what your values framework looks like, whether you're an economic populist or whether you're attracted to right-wing populism. Most of Labor's base is economic populist, so they're unlikely to bite down on immigration narratives. They're unlikely to blame individuals or minorities for their problems, and they have problems. They're more likely to blame their problems on the big end of town. And of course, Labor's base is not fragmenting in the same way because there isn't, for a lot of these voters, a genuine social democratic centre-left alternative. They don't view the Greens as that at the moment. If one appears, we'll be having the same conversation.
So what's the challenge that the coalition is up against here when it comes to fending off one nation in the regions without losing the cities where they are really struggling?
Yeah, they're in a really wicked vice. They're losing these votes on their right flank to One Nation on issues that, look, at the epicenter, as we've discussed, is the economy and a lack of economic purpose. And yes, immigration's there it's a trigger, it's fuel on the fire, so to speak. Flip side, if they try to track this crew, and we could see the federal coalition doing this or having discussions about this, they could further alienate their position in big urban Australia, which we have seen writ large now as a consequence of the two most recent federal elections, them losing seats to the Teals and seats to the Labor Party. Of the last 8 federal seats which the Liberal Party leaders have occupied, they only hold one, which is the federal seat of Cook. Everything else, whether it was Malcolm Turnbull, Tony Abbott, John Howard, all these seats they used to hold, they're gone to either Labor or the Teals.
Coming up, political poison. One way the coalition seems to be trying to win these voters back is to tap into things like national identity and migration.
People are deeply concerned that they see politicians who no longer seem proud of this country, who want to talk down the incredible history of this country.
We deserve to live in a country where everyone who comes here respects our democracy, respects our freedoms, respects our values. And so,
will that work? What do we know about how that kind of rhetoric plays with voters?
Yeah, it's poison amongst younger Australians who are economically populist, so to speak, in terms of their values framework. Absolutely toxic amongst younger women in particular. And of course, dynamite with regards to the two massive diasporas, which is Indian and Chinese Australians. And we saw the consequences of that poisoned relationship with them losing Menzies, Bennelong, Reid, seats that historically they've been quite competitive in, and they are now losing.
And these diasporas, particularly the Indian community, actually quite conservative in their politics. And yet Albanese seems to be holding on to those diasporas quite well. Is that because the Liberal national brand is just so toxic?
Yeah, a really good way to describe this is that these are Australians who are aspirational, wealth accumulators, socially conservative, believing in business. They should be Menzies-type voters, right? But when we speak to them, we ask them, okay, you've just taken us through all these values that you hold. You should be voting Liberal. And they go, yeah, but they don't like us.
Yeah.
They're voting on sectarian grounds. And we know sectarian voting behaviour is a lot harder to break than people appreciate.
We also saw a coalition proposal leaked that was pretty hardline. It would see a ban on migrants from 13 countries, so-called terror hotspots, including Gaza and Somalia. Now coalition members are distancing themselves from that plan. What can we read into that?
Because, again, these two diasporas we've been talking about, if you're a Chinese Australian and you have expressed to researchers over many years concerns of a heightened level of political aggression coming out of the coalition with regards to Chinese Australians and China in general, most Chinese Australians will think, well, we're next. We'll be on that list eventually. So it's not about who they're identifying right now. Everyone else is going, well, am I going to be next? So it's absolute political poison for them in the big cities, particularly Melbourne and Sydney.
So we've seen this shifting political landscape where the coalition is struggling to the point of, almost demise, and One Nation is soaring. What consequences will that have for our democracy and our stability in this country?
Yeah, we're in uncharted territory. We don't know what this is going to look like at the ballot box. Our first preview will be at the end of March, South Australian election. Again, some polls have been published over the last few days that gives us a pretty strong indication what that looks like in South Australia, where the Liberal Party will probably end up with 0 seats. News poll has them at 14% and One Nation running second. So if that trend continues, we could see at a federal level, One Nation winning a bunch of seats in regional Australia, mainly National Party seats, but also some Liberal Party seats. The Farrer by-election will give us an indication there. And then, of course, a further, I would say, decline of the Liberal Party's position in big urban Australia. So federal seat of Mitchell, which Alex Hawke holds, I wouldn't be surprised if the Labor camp go after that the next federal election.
And finally, Kos, a lot of people assumed that the popularity of what were formerly fringe elements of the political landscape would dwindle once boomers started dying out. But it seems, because of Generation X in particular, we've seen Hanson support rise to unprecedented levels. What do you attribute that to, given that Generation X were born into multicultural Australia? It's the Australia that we've always known. Does their support for Hanson mean that Hansonism is here to stay?
I would say so. I mean, it's very important for us to find these Gen Xers who are reporting to us that they intend to vote for Pauline Hanson as not conservative, but anti-establishment, right? And that's the difference here. They're not interested in established conservative politics. That's not what drives them. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's 35% of them in our research that of Gen X that want to do this. Of course, there's 31% who are planning to vote Labor. So it is quite a polarised generation. But in the middle, and sandwiched completely out of the picture, is the Liberal Party.
So I get to say, Kos, that there's a fair degree of disestablishmentarianism going around.
Absolutely. Tear the place down, burn the place down is the mindset out there at the moment.
Kos, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
"7am is a daily show from Solstice Media. It's made by Atticus Bastow, Ariel Richards, Chris Dengate, Crystal Keller, Nicole Johnston, Travis Evans, Zoltan Fecho, and me, Daniel James. Our theme music is by Ned Beckley and Josh Hogan of Envelope Audio. Thanks for listening to 7am. Have a great weekend.